I'm a speech-language pathologist, and today me and my colleagues, who are also speech-language pathologists, Maranita, Rebecca, and Kara, are going to talk about code switching and dialectal differences. So just to run through our schedule for today, we're going to begin by talking about what dialectal differences are, then we're going to move on to code switching, and lastly, we're going to talk about the under and over-identification of language learning disorders. So before we begin, I just wanted to say that about 92% of speech-language pathologists, or SLPs for short, are white, and only 7% identify as bilingual service providers, and about 80% of teachers are white. So this means that many SLPs and teachers are providing services for students from backgrounds that are different than their own. And in 2016, only 8% of school-based SLPs reported feeling qualified to serve multicultural populations. And just one more thing before we begin, I wanted to explain what cultural competence is. So according to the American Speech Language Hearing Association, also known as ASHA, cultural competence is a dynamic and complex process requiring ongoing self-assessment, continuous cultural education, openness to others' values and beliefs, and willingness to share one's own values and beliefs. This is a process that evolves over time, and it begins with understanding one's own culture, continues through reciprocal interactions with individuals from various cultures, and extends through one's own lifelong learning.
Okay, so the first main topic that we're going to be touching on today in this presentation is going to be dialectal differences. So a question that some of you might be having is, what is a dialect? What are these dialectal differences? So dialects represent different variations of both social and regional grammar, pronunciation, and even vocabulary. So for example, the main social dialect that we hear on a daily basis is African American English, abbreviated as AAE. So this dialect is social because it can be heard across the country, and it has many distinctive features. So it includes, but isn't limited to, the omission of final consonant sounds. So for example, saying pass instead of passed, dropping the B, D, or G at the start of an auxiliary verb. So saying I don't know instead of I don't know. And then the omission of like a present tense verb. So saying they are right instead of they are all right. And again, just a reminder that social dialects are a variety of speech associated with a particular social class or maybe an occupational group within a society, and it's not necessarily based on region. Okay, so now moving on to regional dialects. These are the types of dialects that vary based on where in the country you live. And it's important to note that these differences may not always be spread out the same. You can see that the top map and the bottom map on the right look very different from one another because the one on the bottom has a very focal point where the difference occurs compared to the one on the top. So this top map here is showing the difference between pronunciations of the word crayon. And you can see that it's spread out with a lot of the area in blue, broken up by little bits of red. In contrast, the second map on the bottom shows the difference in the word that is used to describe what we call like a long sandwich. So you can see that most of the country uses the word sub versus one very small focal point that uses the word hoagie. And that is the difference that is in mainly one region. So this would be a really good example of regional dialects. So why should we care about these differences? I found this quote that I really like from Dr. Ute Limacher, and she says, "Dialects and regional variants preserve the unique cultural elements of a given place and region. Knowing a dialect or regional variant means that we know more of the roots, the history, and the soul of a region, a local society." And so when we start to understand these differences in dialect amongst our students, it not only gives us the opportunity to appreciate other cultures and other regions, but it allows us to connect with our students on a deeper level. So if we understand why they're using the grammar they're using or why they're using the words that they're using, we might be able to have deeper, better conversations with them. And importantly, it also prevents us from kind of overcorrecting students who have these differences, because we'll understand that it is not, a language problem. It is not them kind of speaking against us and what we're trying to teach them, but it's part of the culture. It's part of their dialect.
And now we're going to move on to code switching. So what is code switching? Code switching, also called language mixing, is the use of elements from two languages in the same utterance or in the same stretch of conversation. Code switching occurs when children or adults alternate between two or more languages. For example, semantic switching can be quiero jugar outside, which means I want to play, and then they're saying outside. It could also be a phonological switch while they say ball o, because in Spanish, nouns generally end in an O or an A ending. Who can code switch? Anyone. Anyone who knows even a little bit of a second or third language can code switch. Code switching among toddlers, children, teens, and adults has been extensively documented across many languages and settings. Contrary to popular belief, code switching is not a problem. When children code switch, they maintain the rules of the grammar of both of their languages, showing that they are keeping their languages separate. Even before they are born, babies' brains distinguish and separate between two languages. Code switching shows children's competence because they draw from vocabulary in all of their languages. So what should you do? As a school administrator, as a school teacher, you should expect that children are coming from multilingual homes are going to code switch. You can observe their language skills and their general knowledge, and you can be strong models to support learning and development. And how is one a strong language model? You use language to extend children's original questions or comments. You listen responsively to children. You start and continue conversations that children are already interested in. Be intentional about supporting vocabulary acquisition. Support children in remembering and talking about past events and personal experiences. And as a general rule, adults should ask questions and make comments in only one language at a time, although code switching may be present.
All right, so now we're going to get a little bit into over and under identifying. There are plenty of students from a minority background that speak a non-mainstream dialect. Sometimes AAE linguistic features can be easily confused with language impairment. ASHA's precision statement on social dialects is: no dialectal variety of American English is a disorder or a pathological form of speech or language. Although standard English is used by the media, businesses, school settings, etc., non-standard English speakers may find it advantageous to have access to the use of standard English. Children who enter school speaking a non-mainstream dialect will then learn to dialect shift, also known as code switch, and can be applied in different settings and with different communication partners. Assessing children with different dialects. Over-identification. A child who is typically developing and gets misidentified as having a disorder can lead to missing out on classroom instruction when they're getting pulled out for speech services. The child does not have a language disorder, but their daily use of their language and dialect are being labeled as pathological. Under-identification, a child who has a disorder but is identified as typically developing. The child does not get referred to services, which can lead to missing out on needed intervention. Further at risk for falling behind academically. Here we have a quick example of under-identifying. Most of the time, parents from a different culture background are not aware of the child's difficulty with language. In a population study of 9,600 children by Morgan et al., 2016, they mentioned that at age 5, Black African American children were less likely to be receiving speech-language services compared to white non-Hispanic children. And children from lower SES backgrounds were less likely to receive services. So, the takeaway messages for code switching and dialect differences: understand the difference between dialect and disorder. Be familiar with the different features of different dialects. And give time for the child to understand how to dialect shift. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.